Hello, welcome everyone to Goldster's highly unusual Purpose, Passion and Grit today. It's a show that embodies the brilliance of the human spirit, its yearning for adventure, its propensity to get things wrong, and its ingenuity in winging it and going ahead anyway on the hoof. I'm Hmphrey Hawksley, and my guest today is, you notice how I say that is, my Goldster co-presenter and explorer extraordinaire, Rosie Stancer, who as we speak is trekking the Sinai Desert in Egypt, flanked by camels and Bedou tribesmen who are guiding her teams through ancient ruins and undulating arid land. Now, she was hoping to be at the ancient St. Catherine's Monastery, continuously inhabited since the 6th century and one of the most isolated places on earth to worship. She was also hoping that there would be Wi-Fi, phone signals, Instagram, who knows, an explorer needs to be filled with optimism. And we arrive at our Goldster PPG today and we don't exactly know. Well, Ben, do we still not know where Rosie is?
Hmphrey, I actually got a call from her about 30 minutes ago.
Right.
So I recorded it. So we have a message from Rosie.
A message from Rosie to our wonderful Goldster. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
Hello, Ben. Hello, Goldsters. Hello, everyone. It's Rosie, actually managing to make contact from 2,700 odd meters, having summited St. Catherine's Mount with Lee Watts as well, taken up most of the way with a wonderful Bedouin guide who's left us to summit, I think, so that we can really drink in the atmosphere, which is something very special, highly charged, and the views are biblical. And I would shout with joy to you all, but I can't because there's a Russian hermit just below us and we really don't want to disturb his peace. He comes up here and fasts and just drinks water that the Bedouin bring him for 40 days. Very biblical. And the views from here, to try and describe them to you, well, words just don't do it justice, because it's more than that. It's views 360 degrees as far as you can see, above the granite mountains, down to the sandy plains, right, stretching back to, you could just make out near where we started, the great mountain range which divides North Sinai from the South. And all you can hear is the wind and the occasional bird call. And the atmosphere is intense. One feels at a high altitude in every sense. You do feel a great proximity to an ethereal energy. And even on top Mount Sinai yesterday at 2,400 meters, where there was a feeling that you was just steeped in the biblical history, and one felt very emotionally charged, of tears to the eyes very easily. And it's just a very unique experience, and we're going to stay up here a wee while just to soak up the atmosphere and to be quiet as well. And I'm so happy that we've managed to make contact with you all and share a bit of this experience, because maybe it's because we've got a good satellite link at last, because after all, we could almost reach out and have the satellites from here.
Well done in getting that, Ben. That's incredible. And that is where Rosie is. We're going to go into all of that very shortly, because she is certainly not the fine figure of adventure that we have called in to be what is called in the broadcasting shade, we call a presenter's friend. And Goldster is lucky enough to have with us a great friend and a colleague of Rosie Stance's, an intrepid explorer who simultaneously but separately in 2019 trekked and skied across Russia's Lake Baikal in Siberia. He was one of the stars of the BBC documentary Castaway 23 years ago. And more importantly and wonderfully, yes, he has also walked some of the Sinai Desert, so he knows what we're talking about. Welcome, Mike Laird, to Goldster, Purpose, Passion and Grit.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's brilliant to be here to see all the things you've done and all the things Rosie has done. We have some more pre-recorded clips from Rosie that we're going to play in a moment, and Mike and I, we're going to talk through this. But first, Mike, you know Rosie very well. Describe her to us. What gives the grit to that sort of person?
Rosie is indeed quite a unique character. I was thinking about this earlier today, and had the film True Grit not been written and created, it surely would be about Rosie. On one hand, she's quite a dichotomy, Rosie. So on one side, if you know her, she comes across and exudes amazing sophistication, elegance and refinement. And yet, on the other hand, when you see her in the field, she is everything that an explorer is, looks a little bit sort of in the element, a little bit tough, tenacious. She's got unstoppable grit, unstoppable drive. And that's what gets her across the line.
Yes, Emma has come in here. Thank you for that, Mike. And I forgot to point out that this behind me here is the Sinai Desert. It is where Rosie is. I am, of course, not there because I'm talking here to Mike on a clear line. Thank you. Emma says, Humphrey, perhaps you are part of Rosie's team because your Zoom background shows the terrain Rosie must be witnessing. And thank you for reminding us, Rosie is not with us, but you can ask any questions you want. Mike can field them. We will pass them on to Rosie for when she gets back and to talk to us about that. The purpose of the trip and going through the Sinai is to gather information about climate change impact and on the tribes living there. And Rosie is with the painter Arabella Dorman, Dom Oliver, who is recording the climate change data, and Lee Watts, a former paratrooper who is keeping everyone safe. Mike, when you prepare for an expedition like this, tell us how you put your team together and how long it takes.
Certainly. All trips are different. So I suppose the very first thing that I actually do before I look at people is probably look at logistics. So how I'm going to get there, how I'm going to get out in a planned extraction, but also how I might get out in an unplanned extraction. So risk management is very much a consideration. Then, of course, if you are traveling with other people, it's easier if they're known people to you that you've traveled before with, but that's not always the luxury that one would have when leading such an expedition. And then, of course, things like equipment, communications, medical and nutrition. So there's quite a lot to think about before you set off.
Yeah. And I mean, months of planning.
It can be. It can be. For some trips, it is months, particularly when you're taking on something that's new, unknown, and you're more remote from people and assistance.
Yeah. I mean, and you, both you and Rosie, you've done the extreme cold and the extreme heat and everything in between. So now my iPhone tells me that currently it's 16 degrees in the Sinai Peninsula. Who knows if that's right? It's just past 2 in the afternoon. We've got a clip of Rosie describing to us the Sinai Peninsula, and let's talk about it after that. Ben, can we play that?
The Sinai Peninsula is that little triangle that sits between the main part of Egypt on its western side, and on the eastern side is Saudi Arabia, and its western coast is the Suez Gulf, and its eastern coast, there lies the Aqaba, Gulf of Aqaba, and the top of the Sinai is the Mediterranean Sea, and Sinai belongs to Egypt, obviously, and to the bottom is the Red Sea.
Sinai is sort of autonomous from Egypt and is extremely tribal. There are many different groups and who really rule their sections quite fiercely. And we are fortunate enough to be walking with three different groups.
In fact, there are 7 tribes, and we're walking with the Aliquot, the Jebeliah, and the Mazina. And that's why every time we cross one of their invisible to us boundaries, we have to change the tribes and we have to change the camels, and there's quite a big do about it.
Yeah.
That's an incredible thing, the changing the tribes and the camels. Jean Joy says, I've been following this amazing journey on Instagram. Wonderful. It is wonderful, isn't it? And Angie, exciting. Thanks, Ben, for recording this. Yes, thank you, Ben. Mike, tell us a little bit about the conditions that that Rosie would be in now. You know, she's not walking on sidewalks or footpaths, is she?
No. It's tough going out there. It's very tough on the human body. You're often walking on very uneven ground, but it also changes. So at times you'll be in sand that you sink into. At other times you'll be on hard bits of broken rock, and at other times you'll actually be on complete rock surfaces. It all takes its toll on the knees, the ankles, and the hips, but also on your footwear and your clothes. They get pretty battered. But I think the hardest thing of all is the grit. The sand in your socks, the sand in your sleeping bag, the sand in your eyes, it gets everywhere.
Good. I think many of us might remember the film Lawrence of Arabia, where he goes across the desert to Aqaba. Is this what we're talking about here?
Absolutely, yes. So most of that, and we've already alluded to the 7 tribal groups. So this was during the time, I'm not going to state a precise year, but towards the end of the First World War, where Lawrence of Arabia, who was working for the UK government in both civilian and military capacities, united the Arab revolt under King Faisal. And they took Aqaba from a side from the north, which wasn't expected. So it's exactly the region they were in. Specifically, they were in, I believe, an area called Wadi Rum at the just north of Aqaba.
Yeah. And that's and I remember the scenes in that, although I saw it many years ago. It's sort of very long scenes of Omar Sharif going to meet Peter O'Toole, who was playing T. Lawrence, and the director David Lean let it go on forever and ever and ever. Is that what it's like? You're looking across these huge vistas with walking for hours and never really getting any closer.
Yes, sometimes it is magical, and sometimes it is hard trudging. So, for example, you're not glued to a compass or a GPS. You do sometimes just fix a position on the horizon and walk to it. And you might walk to it for a day or 2 days or 3 days. So it could be like being in London and almost sighting something on the far side of another county and just walking towards it for 30, 40, 50 miles.
And your mindset, given that, you're walking, you've got this, as Rosie said, 360 degrees horizon around you, or maybe rocks and mountains. Do you get into a sort of a Zen-like mindset there?
You do start thinking of things that you don't normally think about in your home life. You're removed from the clutter of mobile phones, prescribed times to attend meetings, picking up children from school, getting shopping, cooking meals, and so on. So your whole world out there becomes a very different consideration. Obviously, the time pressures. So temporal pressure is something significant on a walk of this nature, where you're always trying to achieve a certain distance in a certain time frame. So there are lots of different thoughts coming into play.
And how interesting. Amber says, when traveling down the Suez Canal towards Aqaba, there were guards on both sides of the banks, and I was told it's the border, but it is still in Egypt. Can you explain that, Mike? It's security, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a huge amount of security in the region. We have to remember that in relatively recent times, this was given up by the British in 1956. Since then, there's been a huge amount of, I'm not being disrespectful, but without going into lots of politics, let's just call it turmoil and peace. So different things happening from different sides, pacts being made, pacts being broken. And of course, there still remains a considerable amount of distrust. On top of the two countries, we're also looking at two different religions in the region, or two primary different religions and subdivisions within that. So it is still very tribal in essence.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. The map that you're seeing at the moment is one that Ben and I got up, but that red dot in the middle of there is St. Catherine's Monastery, that which is around where Rosie is at the moment, because she made the call from the mountain there, and this has been their destination in a way up until now. So they've been walking towards it, and we're going to get some idea at the end of it what it's like to be approaching it. What are the two religions, primary religions? Amber's asking, Mike.
Well, the two primary ones would be the divisions of Muslims, Sunni and Shia. But St. Catherine's Monastery is also, it's anything and everything to do with the Abrahamic, so relating to Abraham. So, of course, it's Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all come together there.
Oh, that's fascinating. And Rosie, I'm not sure if I caught it right. Rosie talked about being quiet because there was a Russian hermit that was close by who was fasting for 40 days. Did you catch it like that, Mike?
I didn't see any hermits whilst I was there, but before this monastery was actually built, it was already a center for hermits. So the monastery was built between AD 548 and 565. And as I think you alluded to earlier on, it's the oldest, oldest consistently inhabited and used Christian monastery in the world. So it's a hugely important place, and it's supposedly built on the site of the burning bush, and that is also what makes it so incredibly important to so many different religions.
Oh, that is an incredible little tangential piece that you've given us there. Sue Townley. Sue, we're going to be answering this later on, but I'll going to put your question out there. Presumably Rosie and the team must be under some time pressure so they can be handed from one set of guides to the next. What happens if they're late? Don't go away, because we're going to be answering that. Thank you. So fascinating, says Amber. We have another clip here, which is Rose's description of a place called Echo Valley that she would have gone through a few days ago. Have we got that, Ben?
Hi, good evening. It's Rosie and Pom, and we have been in the desert now for nigh on a week, and it all began, our journey, near Serabit in Echo Valley, where we walked across some flat plains with an incredible, magnificent view ahead of us, and hazy mountains in the distance. It's very varied going. It looks as if you're going to be trudging along through the flat sand for hours, days, but it seems very quickly before it changes dramatically into walking across gravel,
smooth rocky boulders, and always in the distance are these extraordinary sort of jagged mountains, which you get that marvellous kind of blue haze early in the morning, and then you can just look to your left and suddenly those mountains become rounder or larger and redder. There's extraordinary sort of iron ore, there's lava, there's basalt, there's granite, sandstone. I mean, the geology just shifts literally before your eyes, and you can just imagine the sort of tumultuous earth events that have changed this landscape. It's staggering in its beauty.
It is, and it's like a geologist's feast, because when you walk through...
What a description there, Mike. Ring a bell with you?
Absolutely. It's a magnificent landscape, and one that anyone would be privileged to set foot in and walk part of.
It really is. And is she making light of it? Because she doesn't mention the grit and the heat and the uneven surface and the sand in your shoes that you mentioned.
Rosie is a modest lady who has a habit of understating challenge and difficulty. So while she portrays it in this particular manner, I'm sure that she and her co-travelers are certainly facing more challenges than she lets on.
Right. Well, we will prize it out of her when we all when she gets back and we talk to her properly. Geeta, amazing. Rosie describes it so well. We can truly imagine it. It's sort of, you get the geology and the landscape, but there's a spirituality about it as well, isn't there?
There is. It's a place where one can reflect, let alone in the proximity to St. Catherine's Monastery, but just being under the stars and away from distractions of modern life, speaking to the Bedou nomads who are accompanying them and trying to understand a little bit about the simplicity of their life and what it is that, what are their concerns in a day? Is it to do with pastoral movements and the well-being of their crops and their animals? Their lives are so very different and so hugely interesting.
Yes, and that's beautifully put. And you talked about the Bedou and the camels. Rosie, just if I've got this right, she goes from tribe to tribe, which we're going to get into a minute, and they're traveling not on camels, they're walking, but their gear and everything's on the camels. And in this next clip, we get wonderful descriptions of different types of camels.
And we're never bored, are we, Pom? Because we are walking with the Bedouin and the camels, and although vocabulary is a bit stringy at best between us all, there's much pointing and drawing and with rocks in the sand and things, and learning about the plants that we're walking past and all the thorny bushes and what the camels eat, what they don't eat, what's good for them, what's not, what we can eat, what we shouldn't eat, and what to them.
It's very charming how the Bedouin will stop with their camel because they see a delicious plant that they feel that the camel really needs, and then they'll always allow it to have, say, 3 bites of some wonderful kind of spiky plant which has little blue flowers, because apparently the camels love the sort of tickly feeling it gives them on the roof of their mouths.
And some of the prickly plants, they let them eat them because it cleans their teeth, apparently. And it's terribly tricky, isn't it? Because certainly does. Yes, I know the breath of a camel is not something you want to get too close to. And it's also terribly difficult because when we're allowed to take our camels, because we have our own camels allotted to us now, and we make great friends with them, but it's very difficult to know where we're allowed to let them pause and have a good chomp or not. And we've learned a lot as we go also about camel speak, how to get them to kneel for unloading, how to get them to stand, stop, get a move on. Yep. And the pace is very difficult as well, because I know you ask about whether it's like something in the movies, the sort of the shimmering, searing heat, but it's well, it has been quite hot at times, actually, isn't it?
Sometimes it has been very hot. I mean, in the evenings, of course, it's quite chilly. You certainly want to rug up. But yes, I think it is a bit like the movies because of the light in the certainly in the dawn and in the afternoons. I mean, there's this wonderful golden light with long shadows in the afternoon. I mean, it is simply breathtaking in its beauty.
That's a wonderful picture of Rosie catching the breath of a camel there. I don't think I've ever heard about cleaning the teeth of a camel before. Mike, tell us how it actually works with the camels when you're on an expedition like that.
I will do. If I can relate a little story to you, first of all, is that I spent time riding camels actually out in the Sinai some years ago, about 25 years ago. And the Bedou all laughed at me hysterically one day when I let go of my camel, having dismounted. And she was only a young girl camel, which is all they thought I could manage. Her name was Shashara, and she decided to bolt before I could tie her to a tree. And they had to send a man on a large bull camel to go and retrieve her, which caused great hilarity. but that was also so engaging. These are the moments which, when you have language barriers, can form that bond and give you a special moment. So Rosie was also talking about the feeding of the camels with prickly bushes, etc., to clean their teeth. It's intrinsically important, and the bond between the Bedou families and their beasts is an incredible one to witness. She's very, very lucky.
Did you? I mean, did you bond with a camel? Do they have names? Do they? There was something.
Yes. I will still remember that my camel that left me was called Shishara. And that's 25 years ago. I can remember that name. So it was a very interesting time. Of course, I was only her mount for a short period of time, a number of days. But the bonds between these owners and their camels is lifelong, and the life of a camel is a long one. So they're hugely important family members, really.
And so the sort of makeup is the explorers, which were you. Then the Bedou, who you have to bond with, but you say the language, so there's no English spoken at all. Do they speak Arabic or their own dialect?
They do not speak what is known as modern standard Arabic. They all speak individual languages and dialects thereof. So even when you are moving between the tribes, there will be distinct languages and nuances of languages between them. And there's usually a middleman who has the ability to move between the tribes and do all of these negotiations.
Oh, okay. That's that's fascinating. And we've got a clip of talking about the tribes in a few minutes. Perhaps Emma has a question here. What dangers would Rosie and her team face from such a desert terrain?
Well, I think an awful lot of the dangers are to do with your physical well-being. There could also be things like camels could become slightly aggressive at times. They're not particularly dangerous to humans, but they're known for being grumpy. And apart from just spitting on you and having a terrible halitosis, they are known to bite occasionally, but most of them are fairly well controlled.
Yes. Okay. So that's you rode them? They're not that comfortable to ride, are they?
No, and it's more the saddle. Without going into it in too great a detail, men's physiology is different, obviously, from a lady's, and the front horn at the front of a camel saddle causes a little bit of knocking and agitation after a while, and it becomes increasingly uncomfortable day by day.
Oh, goodness. It jolts and jolts and jolts.
Absolutely, yes.
I do remember in Rajasthan going with a colleague that was on a camel and I was on a horse, and they were completely battered at the end of the day.
Yes.
The horse is fast and smooth in comparison.
Indeed.
We're going to. The next clip is about climate change, and there's a lot of interesting information there. But give us an idea, Mike, yourself, because you've been to so many different places, different climates and temperatures and everything. Yeah. Give us an idea of what impact you've seen over the past 20, 25 years of climate change.
Yeah, for sure. If I was just to attribute that question directly to the area that Rosie's in, the first thing that people need to understand is that this is actually, believe it or not, one of the coldest provinces in Egypt. So we see the beautiful backdrop there with glorious sunshine across the desert sand and mountains. And of course, that's true. And we're hearing today it's 16 degrees.
Yes.
It can easily get to the mid-30s, even in this province, and of course in other parts of the Egyptian desert, well into the high 40s. But what people don't realize is that this particular area can drop as low as minus 16 degrees.
From 30,
okay?
all in one day.
So part of that is to do with altitude. Rosie was talking that she's several thousand meters above sea level. So you lose temperature with height to start with. But of course, with zero cloud cover in the desert, because there's no precipitation, you don't really get the blanket of warmth that clouds provide over land at nighttime. So when the sun goes, the temperature drops dramatically. And most evenings, even in the height of summer, it'll go -1, -2.
Goodness. And the climate change element that you've witnessed there and elsewhere, say, over the past 20, 25
Yes,
years, is it more extremes?
I'm not sure. I haven't actually read any papers or measured it myself, but the typical impacts that you would expect is that this area comes to life when rain falls once or twice a year. Seeds that are deep in the ground will suddenly bloom. You'll get carpets of flowers and grass in localized areas. And that, of course, is great for the livestock, not just the camels, but the herds of goats, etc., and sheep. The other interesting thing is that it fills up the wells, and this is where the nomads will travel from well to well. And these wells are managed by individual families and tribes as well, so that they can water their camels and their sheep and their people when they're traveling. They do nomadic migrations during the year to try and find pasture land. And when these wells are impacted, it is catastrophic to them because it's their sole source of water.
Yeah. So if it doesn't rain,
yeah, they hit serious problems because they can't venture from the coast or from where they have a certainty of water. Goodness. Yeah.
Let's listen to what Rosie now has to say about, they haven't come to any conclusions yet, but let's listen to the clip.
In answer to your question, Hmphrey, about what do we expect to find about climate change on this expedition, well, we never set off with expectations because we're trying to stay mentally neutral about what we discover. And there's always a danger of, following on with a pattern of thought from other places in the world and other people's opinions on global climate changes. Well, Pom, I think since we've arrived here, it seems that the Bedouins look slightly sort of bemused when I ask them about climate change and are they worried about it. They're not in the slightest bit perturbed, are they?
No. Yes, I mean, we found that quite surprising. They did say that the last 2 years has been lacking in rain, but this happens.
Yes, it happens. They didn't see it as any threat to their future. No. And in fact, as we've crossed, which we have now, over the ring dike, there are some really lush valleys here, wadis, palm trees, almond blossoms. It's abundant.
Well, it's abundant, largely because, of course, we're walking through high mountains, but they have, of course, worked wonderful irrigation systems for the individuals, so they can make these little gardens of just glorious. I'm sure there are oranges, but we don't see them in this, this
figs,
time.
Almonds,
and now when we see, everything is, it's winter, and suddenly, of course, one just sees one magical almond tree in the middle of all this hard rock. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. But when we first started, the Bedouin were saying that they had rain, not for 2 years, but then they'd had rain for the previous 3 years, perhaps not as heavy as they had previously had, certainly not as heavy as from their grandfather's time. But it seemed they were saying they felt the weather patterns were similar to their father's time. Of course, these people are probably younger than we think they were. They're probably in their 30s, so we're talking to 30 to 50-year-olds that the weather pattern hasn't changed that much.
And the wells, I mean, we passed by many water sources and stopping only obviously at some, and some have obviously been ancient and some have been more modern. Particularly the modern ones really geared to irrigation of crops, and the ancient ones, it's a rather clever system because there's an open area, like a little mini reservoir where the camels drink, and then a separate little area where you scoop up with a very old rusty can water for drinking yourself, and the water is absolutely delicious, and both the Bedouin and the camels drink deeply of both.
20 litres for the camel.
20 litres for the
That's what
camel.
they take.
I wonder how many litres we've been drinking a day. A couple, not that much.
Yeah, not that
not
much.
enough,
2
probably.
to 3 possibly. No, I'm sure I should drink more.
But then I asked one about the levels of water in the wells, and they said, well, yes, they have gone down a bit, but they're not perturbed about that. It's almost as if they have a wholesome belief in the powers that be, and Allah will provide, and indeed he always has, and he certainly has here as we approach St. Catherine's.
Up till now, that is for sure.
That is fascinating. That there might, less rain than their fathers had.
Yeah, I loved the description that Rosie and Pom gave there. I think one of the surprises for me was that Rosie and Pom described the water as sweet drinking water, very palatable, very nice. Most other desert explorers that I know, and my own experience, is that the water typically is what's described as brackish. It has a very earthy, almost slightly salty flavor to it, where you drink it through necessity, but you get no enjoyment from drinking it.
Well, that sort of struck me too, because there were 2 separate wells. It seemed the camels drink one and they would drink from the other, but it's the same water, and that it was delicious, that they would just go there and do it without thinking they could get sick at all.
Well, I suppose as well, the blessing on both sides, and by that I mean the Bedu people who are accompanying them and Rosie and her party. For the Bedouins, they have this natural inbuilt tolerance to whatever is in the water. They've been brought up with it, and their bodies are perfectly able to manage that. Us more soft people who have been brought up in slightly gentler environments, we do have the benefit of modern medicines to assist us if we get a stomach parasite like Giardia. Then there are pills that can deal with that when you get home, and in the short term, certainly you're generally pretty able to deal with it on a short expedition.
Okay, did you get that at all, any of you?
I actually got Giardia, which is an internal gut parasite, but it was from drinking untreated water in Central America, which even my horse at the time refused to touch.
Couple of questions in. Are there desert snakes and other wild animals in the desert, asks Emma.
Absolutely, yes. There's no question at all. Snakes are few and far between, depending upon the area. There will, of course, be areas where it would be very unwise to go around poking about underneath stones and so on. There will be plenty of small mammals in the desert, ranging from foxes to types of rodent and mice. And the creepy crawly, which is out there in number, is scorpions. And there'll be quite a few varieties of them. Most people think the large black ones are going to be the harmful ones, and they can be anything up to 8 or 9 inches long. But actually, the nastiest are the small yellow ones.
Oh, goodness. And they can be in your tent or your shoe, can't they?
You've got to keep an eye out for them for sure.
We're going to move. We've got some other really good questions coming in, but actually, let's deal with Geeta's first whilst that slide is up there. What are the stone or sand structures, please? Do you know what they are, Mike?
Well, my best guess would be that they're probably remnants of a former settlement. Yeah. It's hard to tell based on what I can see in this image. But the other thing that they might be is funerary monuments. So I've been in areas of Asia, not far away from this, where you get funerary towers. So it's possible that it could be those, because in the foreground here on the flat level ground, you can see what probably is something like a Land Rover or a Toyota Land Cruiser. Yes. And that gives you an idea of perspective. So they're not small structures. They could be houses, they could be funerary towers.
Okay, that's great. Geeta, I'm going to save your next question for later, because I want to go on to the tribes. We have a great clip now of Rosie describing her experience of the tribes. Then Mike is going to tell us how it actually works.
I've always dreamt of going to St. Catherine's Monastery. Since a child, I've had romantic notions of a place of deep faith and pilgrimage nestled in the mountains. And today I was far from disappointed. Not only has it been the summit of a physically very hard journey through the desert with Rosie, Pom and Lee, but it's also a spiritual journey. And the arrival here at a place of such profound faith for so many people from all over the world and all creeds, Jews, Christians, people from the Islamic world, who all come together in a common purpose, is something deeply moving and a real privilege to witness.
I think we jumped a clip there, but no matter, we will go back to it. But whilst we've got that image of St. Catherine's, which is the destination that Rosie and her team have had for a week going on, Mike, you've seen St. Catherine's?
Yes. Yeah. When you approach it through either one of the wadis, so the valleys, or whether you're coming down off the Mount Sinai, you get met by a fairly formidable walled structure. Now, these walls were built around it, obviously, from a protection perspective. When we think about the history that occurred after it was built in the 6th century, of course, there were an awful lot of disputes, most notably in the area of the Crusades. So this was a place of great pilgrimage. This had holy relics. And it is a place which exudes great calm, spirituality, obviously religion over and above spirituality. And it's important, as we've said already, for multiple religions. And when one goes in, there's the calmness that immediately hits you. Beautiful buildings, but when one also accesses the buildings and the churches and the monastery itself, you get the opportunity to see some of the oldest books still in existence, books called codex, which have unique manuscripts, unique languages, recollections of life in bygone days, religious practices, even things talking about ancient crops and trades in things like cloves and cinnamon and what was important to people at the time, and some of the earliest religious iconography from the Christian world too.
Good grief. And I think, if I might be wrong, but I think it's got the oldest codex or the oldest copy of the Bible in the world is meant to be at St. Catherine's.
It may do. Yeah. I can't say myself, but
yeah,
it may do.
But tell me, when you're approaching it and it's there, is it really like, is it like out of the movies where you're sort of walking towards it and it's getting closer and closer?
Yeah, initially it's almost hard to see because, of course, it's built out of the stones from those mountains. So from a distance of a couple of miles, it's almost impossible to make it out. And then depending upon which route you choose for your approach, you start making out the walls. There are a few pieces of the internal structure that poke up above the wall. So noticeably, one of the domes and also the belfry can be seen. And then there's a lot of modern structure on one side of it. And by I mean one side, I mean other buildings not related. But as a result of the fact it's a place for pilgrimage, there are now the opportunities for local people to be involved in selling religious items and tourism items as well. So it's quite a little cottage business that's grown up. It's the most visited site in the whole of the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay, so because Gillian James talking about tourism, I was so disappointed when our tour of St. Catherine's, due to security reasons, was cancelled. I'm so envious and would really love to see it. We found the clip that we skipped over on the tribes, so let's have a listen to that and then come back, because you can answer Geeta's question about what did you eat whilst exploring, Mike. Let's listen to the tribes.
And the interesting thing is that we see all this wonderful light because we're travelling very early in the morning and until we dare close to sunset, because we have to have these very long breaks in the middle of the day because the Bedouin like to be in the shade under the high sun and rest the camels. Yeah. And can't blame them. In fact, didn't you think, Paul Mike, that they're quite scared of the heat, the sun? Not the heat, maybe, but the sun.
Yes, well, I think
respectful of it.
I think they're respectful, and that, understandably. I mean, it's sort of, it is biblical in that, you know, there's these huge wadis that one walks through, and sometimes they're quite arid, and then there's the green wadi, which is, you know, lush picking for the camels. But you'll find then suddenly you come across and it's barren. There's nothing but one acacia tree, and so of course if there is one that's wonderful, you can sit under the acacia tree and it gives that lovely dappled shade. Otherwise, you hug these sort of basalt walls, could be low type walls,
Yes.
where there'll be a little bit of shadow, and that's
And not so cool, is it? Because they conduct the heat. Whereas when they first stopped under that acacia tree, do you remember? And we thought, well, that's a bit Spartan for shade. But actually, it was cooler.
It was brilliant.
Which the Bedouin knew perfectly well offered cooler shade than on
breeze and
the
things.
rocks. So we've had to adapt to a different sense and passage of time and mileage, because we have to move with the Bedouins' wishes and the camels, because they know best, and they don't go by maps and watches.
No, and the camels too, of course, are loaded with, substantial amounts of food and equipment and water for themselves, let alone us. So they, can only travel, let's say, for 3 hours, and then they need a rest. And we were travelling with a baby camel, young camel, and, she definitely wanted to lie down and have a roll and, a rest.
Yes, they roll in the dust, kicking their hooves up, so it's absolutely adorable, rather like an elephant in the water. And
So, our speed and our
mileage.
are completely controlled by the camel.
Yeah. And the thing that fascinates us, both Pom and I, out of the team, probably, well, also Lee being military, but we're very used to punching out the miles, keeping up the pace, pushing it. And we've had to adapt, and I've found, to my astonishment, that actually we've made such impressive mileage. we seem to have these incredibly long lunch breaks, and sometimes breakfast as well, because there's never time for breakfast in the morning. We just get up and have a sweet, very sweet tea, and off we go. So it's a very delicious new experience, isn't it, Paul?
It is. No, it's a really lovely way of travelling.
Yes, I'm completely wrapped in that. A couple of sort of questions that I think we've had answered there. Sue Townley asked, with the tribes, when you're handing over, what happens if you're late? Mike, they don't have watches, they don't have maps. What happens?
No, they don't. So for them, time is a very different concept and idea to what we see time as. If somebody says to me, okay, I'll see you at 11:30, there's an expectation that you'll be there at 11:30, give or take a couple of minutes. So this is where European people might become slightly frustrated with the Muslim Arabs, the Bedou people. But can you imagine as well that they might become frustrated with us and our obsession with time, where they have a more relaxed perspective? They always get there, they always deliver, they do it generally with a smile and grace and helpfulness and kindness, but they have less of an obsession with time. So someone might say, for example, I'll see you in the morning. Well, yeah, it'll happen. If it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, it's still in the morning. And you need to adapt your mindset to think the way that they do. And that's where you can remove the stresses and foster more friendship and happiness.
And the tribal areas, they seem to be quite precisely defined in the minds of the tribes people and the differing tribes, but there are no markers or anything.
There aren't markers, but these tribal divisions will have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So, for example, as you're walking along, someone might well know that between what might be called the Green Oasis and the Big Mountain, that might belong to one tribe. And then between the Big Mountain and the coast at the sea, that belongs to another tribe. And the markers will be quite easy for them to understand, because there may be a line, an invisible line, that links, for example, all of the wells that you might pass on a north-south route between X and Y. And they just know this because their fathers knew it and their uncles know it.
It's a fascinating concept. No time, no maps, just knowing these things. Geeta asked, what sort of food did you eat? We got an impression of that from Rosie, but fill us in a bit.
Sure. The food that they take has to be able to endure the journey. So there's an awful lot of very nutritious, very tasty, but quite simple foods that they will have with them. Needless to say, There will be things like dates and fruit and vegetables. They don't eat an awful lot of meat, certainly not when they're traveling. Meat is more commonly reserved for celebration. So, for example, if someone is going to slaughter a sheep for a feast or a family event, like a wedding, that would be done when you're in situ at a permanent camp. The one thing that they do make a lot of when they're traveling in the ground on a fire is bread, and it's always super, super delicious.
So there's bread and sweet tea and no breakfast. So you're expected to walk for miles on an empty stomach.
No, breakfast can exist. Sometimes as well, there will be leftover bread from the night before. They wouldn't start cooking in the morning. They'll do the more serious cooking in the ground at night, because in the morning you do want to get up and get going before it gets too hot. But sometimes as well, they will often have a fairly dry white cheese. So if you're getting some white cheese and some bread and a sugared mint tea, that's perfectly adequate to set off for your day's walk.
And you're setting your camp at a place that could be anywhere. There's not any structures or anything there, villages?
No, very rarely. Yeah. If there was a village, you would normally expect to go there and be received. They're very engaging, as long as they know you're coming. You know, there will be tribes which will be friendlier with each other, I'm sure, and some will be less friendly. But the people that Rosie will have engaged to work out the route will have worked this out in advance, hopefully. So I don't think she will meet any unwelcome reactions.
That's brilliant. Mike, stay with us for a couple of seconds, because I've got to tell people what is coming up next and soon on Purpose, Passion and Grit after this great test show that we're having at the moment. March 21st, we are live at Riverstone in Fulham. That is our new live event, and of course on Zoom as well. Sarah Rayner, who is an author, blogger, life coach, and she's speaking about her own experiences with mental health and how she helps others now get through those deepest troughs that affect many people. And now she has a series called Making Friends with Anxiety, Depression, Divorce, and other elements there. That is a best-selling series. We are also hoping to get Rosie back in one piece, and if she can, Riverstone, Fulham, sometime in March, possibly the 21st. So watch this space for that Purpose, Passion and Grit. April the 18th, I am with Tracy Walder, whose tenure in the CIA and later the FBI was hunting down Al-Qaeda terrorists and other violent people, and also fighting against sexism in her workplace. And then on Thursday, on Inside Story, we are continuing our networking, getting out there, meeting people, spying, security, parenting theme that some of you may have kept up with. Lena Sisko, talking about her new book, Honest Answers, whether with friends, family, the community, or colleagues, cementing trust and detecting honesty or dishonesty is one of the most valuable skills you can possess. And then the next day we continue that theme with Robin Dreek, whether you are at a corporate board meeting or untangling thorny issues at the Village Flower Show. His book is called Sizing People Up, The Code of Trust, and it's not all about me. Mike, you know, when you land in these strange places like Rosie has now, you've been to war zones and to very sort of remote and isolated places. How do you forge your trust? Because you've got to forge that pretty quickly, haven't you?
Absolutely. I suppose part of it just comes through intuition. Part of it also comes through good luck. Some people will say that trust is very difficult to earn and very easy to lose. And that adage is certainly very valid. But one thing I would say, particularly about the area where Rosie is that the Muslim people are highly honourable, and they're very engaging. They have a desire to help, to provide for you. So I'm sure that Rosie herself will have experienced a great degree of trust and given trust equally. So there's no particular recipe. I think it just comes through life experience. But there always has to be a degree of self-preservation in the trust environment. And I think as well, people who are going into these more extreme environments where they have a a duty to give trust to other people, they need to always plan their alternate. So if the trust is broken, what then can they do? So from an expedition planning perspective, that's an imperative.
So the extraction from, if you're let down on trust, and the extraction from your physical area are key risk assessment elements. Ben has given us a fantastic shot there of St. Catherine's, and I'm not sure about this, but that mountain going up behind it might have been the one that Rosie managed to get through to us on the sat phone. But before she left, or whilst she was on the way, we asked her to give a sort of Goldster idea of this, that if you have a sense of adventure, maybe you don't know how to go about it, what do you do? So let's have a listen to that last clip.
Basically, getting somebody into adventures is about changing the individual's state of mind and not believing in what other people think, but believing in what they can actually do and what they believe they can do themselves.
That's Lee Watts in a nutshell, ex-para, our expedition coach and trainer, and I've watched him not so much pummel, but train smart people from scratch to very impressive standards. And I think what he's saying, it's just a mindset of set yourself a goal, no matter how small or how great, and be prepared to work, to invest work into reaching that goal.
I think that's right, but I think it's also believing in yourself that you can do something and not to take any notice of whatever anybody else is telling you. And it doesn't matter what age you are or how unfit you are. You'd be very surprised if you put one foot in front of the other what you can achieve.
Absolutely. Don't let other people's peg out your boundaries, and don't peg your own boundaries out either. Just keep pushing them. And I always kind of think of people playing tennis, and there's a ball that goes quite far across the court. You could either stand there and think, oh, I'll never get that, or have a go. And it's always surprising and wonderful when you do actually get that ball, even if it goes in the net.
Yeah, I think also, when one's a bit older, say you're over 50, 55, you're free. Of course, one's got children and grandchildren and all of that sort of thing, but also it is time, or you can, if that's what you want to do, give yourself the time to go and do whatever you want to do. And if you want to do it, you really want to do it, you can do it, whatever anybody says.
Because your real strength isn't in your biceps, it's in your mind, as Lee said at the beginning.
Well, that is inspirational. Mike, any thoughts on that?
Oh, the words that Lee, Pom and Rosie shared with us all there truly are inspirational. I can only echo them wholeheartedly, that people create a little wish list. Everyone has a different ability, but everyone has ability. Create your list, do a bit of a reality check, perhaps, make a plan, phone a friend, make it happen.
And for yourself, what are you planning to do next in the world of exploration?
My next trip, which will be in a couple of months' time, is that I am going to go around the perimeter of Lake Victoria in Africa. So I will be traveling through Kenya, up to Uganda, over to Rwanda, down through Burundi, through Tanzania, and then back home.
And when you say going, are you walking, horse riding, camel riding? How are you doing?
I am hoping to do it on a bicycle. And I am just trying to convince, so this is exactly what we were into, convince my traveling partner, a gentleman called Ben, to train up, to get himself fit and to join me on bicycles, because I think that would be an outstanding way to see these glorious countries. That'd
be a brilliant way. I mean, I'm just, because I know Lake Victoria, I'm just wondering if there are a Sustrans cycle route goes around or not.
I think it's more of a dusty road than a cycle route, but I'm still optimistic, having cycled across Australia myself, that we can knock this one off the list.
That's brilliant. And we are not Bedu here, so time's winged chariot is upon us, and we have to stick to it, unfortunately, as much as I would love to lay back and have some sweet tea. We winged it and I loved it. It sort of went wrong, but let us know if this Goldster on the Hoof with wonderful friends like Mike Laird works or doesn't work. And thank you all for joining in, pitching in with your questions and comments. Tell Goldster if you're planning any adventures and trips, and we'll bring it on. It doesn't have to be a camel and a desert. Until Thursday, when I'm with Lena Sisko and Honest Answers, stay safe, stay curious, stay a little bit adventurous, stay involved, and of course, stay Goldster. Bye, Mike Laird, a great man to be in the exploring trenches with. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, Hmphrey. Bye-bye.